Alright, so I want to talk about a really common mistake that people make when they're learning their handstands, and sometimes it's something they don't notice for a long time, and it's not necessarily a mistake depending on how you look at it, but it is something that can be a huge detriment to you in the long term of your handstand practice, and that's what I call the mini-planche. So if you're not familiar with gymnastics or the planche position, a planche is basically a horizontal handstand, so the body is horizontal and the shape is achieved by leaning the shoulders forward. And the handstand is essentially the opposite of that, where everything is vertical in the ideal form that we want it to be. But what a lot of people do is that they do a little bit of a mini-planche, they lean their shoulders slightly forward, and what that does is it makes it slightly easier to balance. So for example, if I'm standing fully upright, I'm at the highest center of gravity, so it's actually the most difficult for me to stand. But if I bend my knees slightly, it's harder for you to knock me off balance. However, the issue is that I'm using more leg strength to hold myself up that way. So the mini-planche is kind of one of those sacrifices people make. And again, it's usually not something that they make consciously. It's usually the body being clever and figuring out how to lower the center of gravity, how to add a slight counterbalance so that it's a little bit easier to hold the balance. The main detriment, and I'll show you what that looks like, is that when the shoulders lean forward, it's putting more pressure on the wrist. So if I'm doing handstand with good technique, I keep a 90-degree wrist angle, arms completely perpendicular with the floor. It's not really a lot of wrist pressure. However, if I lean my shoulders a little bit forward, the wrist is now under more compression, and maybe I won't feel it for a while, but over the long term, you're putting more stress on the joints, so it's something that you're going to feel later on. And then also, you're in less of a resting position, so once you get into things like press handstand, handstand push-ups, especially any kind of one-arm variation, it's going to make it more difficult if you're used to having to lean forward in your shoulders to balance. So I'm going to show you what that looks like, and then we'll try to go into not the solution, because there are no universal solutions, but this is a potential solution, and in my experience teaching, I found that to work quite well with a lot of people who tend to mini-planche. So I'll show you what it looks like. Mini-planche, if you can see, it's going to be something like this, right? See how my shoulders are going forward, so if I handstand like this, I can do it more upright as well, but it's this idea that I'm leaning forward into my shoulders, and it's not easy for me to hold. I'm not warmed up right now, so that was my first handstand of the day, and instantly my wrists give me feedback that it's more pressure than I need. But as you saw, my center of gravity is lower because more things are on the outside. So the reason a lot of people do this is because they're strong enough to. So this is kind of where we get into a little bit of the subtle details. Is in terms of learning good technique, it can actually be a disadvantage to have the strength, because when you're strong enough to lean your shoulders forward or to bend your arms, a lot of people will do that to make it easier over the short term, but long term they're doing themselves a disservice. And the other reason is, as I said before, it's more difficult to hold a handstand straight because you have less room for error and you're the highest center of gravity, so you're the furthest away from your hands. So I will see some teachers give this cue of leaning the shoulders forward. It's not a cue that I like to give because, again, I'm thinking about the long term. And short term, what this allows is that you don't have to be as precise balancing with your hands, but long term, once you get the balance very refined, the balance should come only from the hands if you're good, and the rest of the body stays completely still. So this is something that acts as a detriment to the future skill work, and as I said already, it's something that puts more stress on the body. So imagine, and the other thing that, people come to me and they complain about wrist pain, and they say, how can I get rid of wrist pain? What exercises? And of course, a lot of exercises can help, but this is always the first thing that I look at is, are they planching? Because imagine, to use walking as a different point of reference, imagine that I couldn't walk upright, that I had to always walk with my legs bent like this, or my knees forward like this. I'm gonna feel it. I already feel it on my knees. And then I would go to a knee specialist and I would say, hey, my knees hurt. What exercises can you give me to help with the pain? When in fact, it wasn't an issue with my knees in the first place. It's the way that I was walking that was causing that issue. So when people talk to me about wrist pain and wrist soreness and especially if they're still kind of beginner stages. That's usually the first thing I look at is, are they doing a handstand? Are they doing the handstand in a way that's unknowingly to them putting more pressure on that joint? So as you know, I don't believe in right and wrong. I believe in different perspectives and different situations. So when would you use this? When would you actually do a mini planche? Well, for me personally, when safety is a concern. So if I'm balancing on something very unstable, if I'm balancing on something very high, and maybe I need a little bit more of a safety net, a little bit more of a room for error so I can come down safely onto my feet and not fall over the ledge, that's something that I'll use. I will planche a little bit. I will bend my arms because it gives me that extra safety. And you'll see this even when you see professional hand balancers, when they balance on something higher or a little bit more unstable, you're going to see a little bit more of a broken line in some places. And it's that idea. It's just the straight handstand is the most efficient, but also the most dangerous as far as potential for falling position to balance in. So in those situations, it is actually beneficial to break at certain joints just to give you that extra level of control. But for your long-term daily practice, this is not something that you should be doing. It's something that you can use to save your balance. It's something that it's good to be strong enough to hold, but it should not be your base technique. So let's talk a little bit about how to correct it. So a big part of these corrective exercises is perspective. It's knowing what it feels like when you're planching and then learning the opposite extreme. Because we have the center ground, and that's when the arms are vertical. So a lot of people haven't experienced actually the opposite extreme to planche. So they feel that when their shoulders are forward, their arms are actually vertical. But in fact, it's not. And then usually when I put them into arms vertical, they feel like they're falling the other way because they haven't experienced what it is to go too far. So this is the idea. We have 3 different positions of the hands, and even just in a whatever press handstand down dog position, we're just gonna feel in the wrists what it's like to go forward, to be on top, and to be behind. So most of the weight is on my hands, and what I'm gonna do is arms vertical, planche, and leaning back. And the idea is just to get more sensitive to what it feels like in the wrist to be in these different positions, because next we're going to do them in the handstand. So next exercise is going to be a modification of what I use as a preparation for handstand push-ups. And again, it's about leaning forward, feeling the lean, and then pushing it back. And in this case, we're focusing on the pushing back. And keeping in mind as well, not to make it more complex, but it is, I can do the same thing without actually opening and closing my shoulder angle, but it's better if we can get open shoulders as well. But I'm trying to manipulate the shoulder in relation to the hand on the floor. So we want the shoulder on top of the hand, and right now we're working with the shoulder in front. So it's gonna look something like this. I lean the shoulders forward, that's my mini planche. I press back. Forward, back. So my feet are very light against the wall. This is a really good conditioning exercise in general for presses and handstand push-ups and all of that. But in this case, we're using it to try to feel the difference between mini planche and vertical. So the next exercise is actually a preparation for the reverse planche or the Mexican handstand, but in this case, we're using it to feel and develop the opposite extreme of the mini planche so that when you're straight up and down, it's not in an extreme of your range of motion or your abilities, it's at the center. So you want to feel here that the weight goes behind the heel of the hand, not towards the fingers, but actually way behind, and it's the opposite shoulder angle that we had before. So back to the wall, like this. You push the chest and the shoulders away from the wall, try not to arch the back, and just kind of find that, I guess you'd call it the friction point if you were driving the stick. Just try to find that point where if you push your shoulders back far enough, the feet start to come off, and know that you can hold yourself like this. And once you can hold yourself like that and catch a balance, then you have the opposite extreme and you're going to be less likely to hold the planche. So the idea is learning both extremes, finding the middle ground, and learning how to correct it when you make those habits. So I hope you found this helpful. I've wanted to put this video out for a long time because literally not even exaggerating, there's at least a couple people who do this exact same thing in every workshop that I teach. So it is a very common habit, and it's understandable why. And the key is not just exercises, but awareness. It's to know that you're doing this. It's to know what it feels like to do it. And then that's how you can work on correcting it. So if you found this video useful, like, share, subscribe, whatever. Check out my workshops down below. Check out my website. You can find my Handstand Ebook there. You can find my Vimeo courses. Let me know what else you'd like to see, and I'll see you next time.